Hello everybody and welcome to Retro Ratchet. So this video is going to be part 2 of the welding series on the ROVER SD1. So as everybody might remember from the last one, this is a retrospective video I'm shooting where I'm putting together just some pictures and doing a little bit of a voiceover, so hopefully it'll maybe help other people doing similar on their cars. So I've got a list of topics here to discuss. Rear floor pans, I'm going to take a look at them. They are just as bad as the front floor pans are, so we'll look at the passenger side, look at the driver's side. I've got a few pictures showing how I made up the jacking points. Again, that might be helpful for somebody. It was really basic what I've done. There's a few repairs I've done on the inner sills, just to allow those floor pans to be repaired. And another big job which I'd like to go through tonight is the bulkhead repairs. Driver side bulkhead, specifically where the clutch master cylinder bolts through, so there's quite a lot of rot behind there, so I think everybody will find that interesting. And maybe a little bit on the front passenger floor, although there was actually minor welding needed on that. I was very surprised. It wasn't like the driver's side. So another thing worth mentioning, I've eventually invested in some decent audio equipment. So I've got one of these Rode microphones, so hopefully the sound quality will be a little bit better in this video than all the previous ones. I know some of the other ones have been quite bad. I've tried various different mics and just using camera or phones, and it's not been very successful. So we'll give these a bash and hopefully it improves things a little bit. So hope you all like, and please like and subscribe. Right, let's get started about the passenger side then. So looking pretty pretty grim from this picture. I think the most important bits to point out here is if you look right at the top of the picture, that's where the petrol tank mounts are. So yeah, they're looking a little bit dodgy there. That's it just from another angle with some of the sound deadening removed off of that upright panel there. You can see that whole seam's rotted out. So yeah, that to be honest was part of one of the biggest headaches of this section, which I'll get into a little bit more in a minute. Now, I've included this picture. This is quite an important picture. If you look right into the centre of this picture, I'll put an arrow up, you can actually see a crease in the cross member. Well, I suppose probably not a cross member, it's a strengthening bar that runs up the centre of the car. Just where that grommet is, so there's a little crease which shows when the car has been jacked up several times in the past. When that seam has actually failed, it's just literally buckled the floor upwards along with that member along the centre. So that was another headache to try and resolve, unfortunately, with that one. So same approach as to with the front. Wire, I got quite an aggressive wire brush. It was like a knotted wire reel or something, I think they call it. I put that on the angle grinder to see where we were at, see how much I was going to have to cut out. So I thought, well, there was my markings. Yeah, a lot of the stuff, you know, just either side of that drain point there, the metal was really thin, and again along the seam with the inner arch, along that seam with the inner sill, that was looking pretty bad too. You can actually see, if you look closely, again I'll put an arrow up, the outermost mount, front mount for the fuel tank isn't really doing anything at all. It's just thin air that's bolted into. Right, that's everything cut out in this picture. Back to sound metal. So what I've done here, this was a little bit of a pain actually trying to straighten out that chassis rail. That was the word I was looking for earlier that I could not for the life of me remember. So yeah, that chassis rail, to try and get that little kink out of it, and when you actually looked under the car, you really couldn't make it out. It's only obvious from the top. I tried various different methods. I tried applying weight, well, my body weight to the top. and then everything just really sprung about. I tried hammering it, that didn't really work. In the end, what I actually done, I've got a little, it's just a little Clark bar that goes across engine bays for when you're steadying engines, when you take engine mounts off. I can't remember the name of them. So what I've done is I put that upside down under the car with some blocks on either side on, well, the most solid bits of the outer sill that I could find. And then with some ratchet straps, I pulled that down, that chassis rail down, slowly bit by bit, left it in that position under a bit of tension, and worked a little bit with a hammer from above. And that seemed to do the trick. Straightened it out, so at least, when we did put in the floor, it wasn't about an inch too high, which would be really difficult for the fuel tank mounts. Okay, so this is a close-up of the inner sill. Just below, well, just in the centre of that picture and above is the seat belt mounting point. So again, I was a bit nervous about just welding straight on top. You can see it's pinholed right the way through, so I decided to start digging into that, so at least we had a solid base for the floor. That's it cut out. It's a little bit hard to make out on this picture, but yeah, I just cut that strip out there. It's probably about 4 inches long by, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch high. The metal at the back of it, which is outer sill, that was all right, so I just cleaned that down, ready for new metal to go in. And yeah, nice little neat repair. Smoothed it off with the grinder, and the rest of it on that inner wing was pretty sound, so I didn't really have to do anything else before I put the floor in. Okay, so this part here, you can actually see how bad that fuel tank mount was. It had actually sheared off altogether. So yeah, there was only 3 mount points holding it on, which isn't ideal. This one here, so yeah, I kept that section that I cut out of the upright just at the back floor, because I wanted to try and copy the contours on that to try and make it look a little bit more factory. It's worth mentioning as well, I don't have any of the professional metalworking equipment to do that, and it's something I don't really have much experience of doing, is trying to shape metal and form metal. So I watched some YouTubes incidentally to try and get some ideas, and from what I gathered was, for these type of things, because of how much you're stretching the metal, it was best to do this in a few sections, because it was going to be really difficult to do it in one. So that's what I've done. I had 3 different sections cut out there, and again I just drew lines and used various different things in the vise, even things like impact sockets, just to hammer around and try and get those profiles as best as I could. And that was me just starting to weld in those first 2 sections there. So yeah, got them seam welded in, and then that's the second upright going in, and the rest of the floor panel. So as you can see, the contours actually worked out. I'm really pleased with them. They're not 100% perfect, but they're as close as a non-professional is going to get something like that. And with that floor repair section, you can see there, I just tack welded right the way around it, and then just seam welded the whole lot in, which might be a little bit of overkill, but I think it keeps it nice and strong. It was an L-shaped repair section, so again it was plug welded along to the sill underneath. I'd done a few little lines of weld just along the top there, just for an extra bit of strength, but they probably weren't really required. So that finished off that, and I was really pleased with how that came out. It did take quite a long time to actually get all of that metal work in and in the right position. Oh, one thing before we move on to the next, you'll probably notice there isn't the holes or the bracketry for the petrol tank. I'll get into that much later. Right, so I'm going to cut in here and interrupt, I guess, the flow of the video a little bit and just look at jacking points and how I made them. So here was a couple that I'd cut out, and yeah, I mean, I could have rubbed them down, painted them, but they were very, very weak. Specifically that one on the right, you can see where it's just bent inwards when it's been jacked up. So on the Maestro project, I haven't went in detail yet on any of my videos on that, but I made all the jacking points on that. So I used a similar setup for the Rover. Got some appropriate thickness of steel there, laid them out, and then literally just measured all the different dimensions of them, left them a little bit longer there just so I could trim them down. So this was me halfway through the process, and all I done there is I ran, I think it was a 1mm blade just up and down the metal just so it was going to bend a little bit easier. I didn't on the middle section, but I'll explain why in a minute. So this is the finished article. So what I've done here, again, very, very basic. I just had some box section steel that I used. You can just see slightly higher up in the picture there. So it was a case of hammering it around that in a vise. And I think it came out all right, to be fair. And again, those little grooves that I put in, the bits that actually weld onto the floor, that made it a lot easier than just to fold them back round. So again, it's not a work of art, but they're going to be functional, and they look pretty close to what came off the car. And there we go. So that's one of them fitted. So that's the rear passenger side. Again, a little bit of overkill. I seam welded them on just for a little bit of strength onto that. I keep forgetting the name of that runs along the chassis rail. It's a chassis rail. I welded them on, seam welded onto that chassis rail and along the floor, and then on again, welded into the sill on the right hand side there. This is it just from a different angle. Coat of zinc primer on there. There's no seam sealer on there. I tended to put that on a little bit later in the process. So again, it's not a completely invisible repair, but the fuel tank does set up there, so it's not something that it's going to be seen. But I think the profiles are all right, and that everything lines up as it should. And there we go. That's the zinc primer on the inside. Again, no seam sealer on that yet. I done that after we got those holes drilled for the petrol tank. Okay, so on to driver's side, rear floor. Pretty much the same story as the other side. I think the upright wasn't as bad as the passenger side, but yeah, I mean, by the looks of it, there's been a lot of water sitting in there for a very long time. So yeah, the knotted wire wheel on the grinder, taking everything back, seeing where we're at. It's all actually reasonably straight at that side, so nothing needed to be adjusted. It was just a simple cut out and replace job. That's just the area there, just closer to the transmission tunnel. That wasn't quite as bad as the outside. So I can cut everything out. That was just a 4-inch disc I used there, and tried not to damage any inner sill as I was doing it, which would just generate even more work for myself. You can see there I was very neatly trying to cut out those jacking points so I could copy them. It's the exact same repair I had to do on the inner sill underneath that seatbelt mount, which was really, really weird. I don't know if it's the case that water gets in there and it is a weak point. Some of you that have done this before might know the answer to that. So again, just cut a little strip out, seam welded in a replacement section there, so at least we had something decent to weld to. That's it ground down, ready for the floor panel to go in. Started off just by making that little upright section. That needed maybe about 3 inches there, and luckily for me there was only the one section that had the contour indentation into there to make, so that was a lot quicker than the other side to get that one in. And then put a lip on there that the floor pan could sit on as well. And that's it, seam welded in. And when I look at it actually now, in retrospect, there was quite a lot of welding involved to get those new panels in. You might notice there's no plug welds that I put in just to the top right of the picture. yeah, all I've done is I just put a couple little beads of weld along that chassis rail. At least I've remembered its name this time, to hold that in place rather than the plug welds from the top. So on this bit, I think rather than cut it out, the metal was thick enough on that section to the right there that you can see the rust eater on. So I just treated it in that manner rather than welding in new metal. I thought it was overkill cutting the whole lot out. I thought I'd try and save that if I could. There's another shot from underneath here. You can see these pristine jacking points that I put in. They've since shown to stand the test of time, you know, because after these were taken, I mean, probably about 9 months, 10 months have actually elapsed where the car has been on axle stands. If you watch some of my other videos, you will see it jacked up by these. So nothing has moved. They're rock solid. So they've definitely passed the test. So yeah, this is it. The welds haven't been cleaned up, as you can see on there. That's the welds cleaned up to an extent, and zinc primer put in. I just actually use the Epsom zinc primer for all these. It's just a brush on one. Some of the welds up there I didn't really grind down again because there was no point, because you're just not going to see them under there. Interior view with the zinc primer in. It looks all pretty neat and tidy, I think. And there, last picture of the floor pans. That was just, I just put some seam sealer along the edges just to stop any water ingress. And that concludes the rear floor sections. Bulkhead. Absolute bane of my life on this car. So I left this nearly to the end of all metalworking because I was a bit scared to tackle it, to be honest. So yeah, as I was exploring around the floor, doing all the welding on that, you know, that driver's side footwell there, if you look up in this picture, just to where the rod comes through for the clutch cylinder, you can see a curious metal bracket half bolted on. So I did think that looks a little bit weird and what's it actually for. So access, as you can tell from that picture, it's really, really tricky with the pedal box, the pedals, the steering column and things in the road. So what I done is I stripped all of that away to actually get some proper access when I realised the full extent of the metal working that I was actually going to need to do in here. So this next picture you can see a little bit clearer. That's with everything out except the column. So yeah, what's obviously happened at some point is the bulkhead itself has fractured around that strengthening plate that holds, well, the clutch cylinder mounts to, and rather than of course welding it or repairing it properly, we've put on what just looks like a cheap bracket you'd maybe get from a hardware store. So yeah, that's not ideal. That's a view from the other side. I took all the sound deadening off the engine bay. That had been holding in water as well. It was absolutely soaking wet, so that would have probably helped all the corrosion there, but you can clearly see once that's removed, and obviously with the brake servo itself removed, that huge crack that just extends straight the way across. Yeah, by this point I was getting a little bit scared of fixing this one because I didn't have any repair panels to weld in. Everything was going to have to be fabricated. But yeah, it's obviously been like that for quite some time. That's the clutch cylinder getting removed there. So what I've done is, yeah, I kind of like traced along just to see how bad I felt or how thin the metal had got. So that was the end result. I cut a fair old chunk there. I mean, that's beside an A4 piece of paper, just to put it into context size wise. So yeah, cut all of that out, and then yeah, just made up a repair section there. I used a little bit thicker steel than I did on the floor. I can't remember the exact thickness, but it was the next size up from what I was using on the floor pans. And what I also done is, rather than it being a flush repair, I actually left an overlap of about 10mm around, so the plate was fitted from the inside, so there was overlap to the original bulkhead, just for an added bit of strength in there. I thought that would probably be the best idea. I mean, this angle here, you can see that's the plate in, and also the strengthened plate. I removed that obviously from the original, drilled out the spot welds, and then plug welded that back into the original place, and then just drilled out where the cylinder, the arm for the master cylinder goes, and the 2 bolts. And here we've got the view from the engine bay. So again, everything was seam welded in. You can see there, nice and strong. So it was, again, a pretty decent repair. To be fair, I was really happy with the end result. That's all painted from the inside. There was another few little patches just down from that you can see that I done well. I was in there that I couldn't quite get to when I was doing the rest of the floor because the column was in the way. It was just a really tricky angle to try and weld it. So anybody that's tried to do these will know you just can't get in, plus a welder with your mask on it. It's near impossible. And this is a view from the engine bay. Again, I just I used the rust eater on the rest of the area where the servo was and around it, and then just zinc primered the rest. So eventually when the car gets painted, well, I'm probably not going to have the engine out when this gets painted. I will leave that for maybe next year. I want to get the rest of the outside of the car painted and MOT'd before I really get into the finer detail, and I'll probably have to find some sound deadening to fit back up to that. But all in all, it was a huge relief for certainly that repair to be made, and the clutch to be operating without any daft brackets holding the master cylinder in. Great, so on to the very last part of this video. Moving on to the front passenger side footwell. So you can immediately see here, it just isn't as bad. That's with most of the sound deadening, that tar material removed, chipped away. A hell of a lot better than the other side. Certainly the jacking point isn't pushed up through the floor. So that was promising, and that's really all I ended up doing in there. A couple of little plates, one of them was over the jacking point. It thinned off just a little bit, so I thought, well, because it does have that jacking point, I want it to be strong. And that's the zinc primer on everything, and the seam sealer on the top. And here we've got the last 2 pictures of this series. Is just some top coat paint going on there. Now again, this was never meant to look factory or anything, and it was actually just a hammerite paint that I used, and I mixed a couple of different hammerites, a silver and a blue. Yeah, it doesn't really look like Moonraker blue, but it doesn't look like silver. It's a little bit darker, there's a little bit of blue in it, but the main idea here was the car is outdoors, and although I've got 99% of the leaks fixed, I still do randomly get a couple of leaks into the car which I haven't quite sussed out yet. So I wanted the floor to be protected, certainly until I figure those out. So I think overall, it looks pretty tidy. It's solid, and there's no rust, and it doesn't look much, and it looks like only a couple of weekends work. But to get to this point, it took far longer than it probably should have. But I think that's a good place to end this video, and I certainly hope everybody's enjoyed this and it's been helpful. I'll move on to part 3, probably another week and a half's time, once I figure out what I'm going to discuss there. I think I'll move on to the rear end of the car, the infamous suspension mounting points, which I touched upon in my very first video, and the boot floor that, stupidly, rather than just finding another boot floor to weld the whole section, I decided to repair it because I thought there was only a couple of patches. But yeah, we'll talk about that more in that one, and that's something to look forward to. So I hope you all enjoyed, and please like and subscribe. If you found these interesting, you want to see more of these.